Hello, healers. My name is Ben, and this is the Moss Report. I'm here today with my father, author and founder of the Moss Report, Dr. Ralph W. Moss. Good morning, Dad.
Good morning, Ben.
So, we have a pretty sweet topic to talk about today, or perhaps it's semi sweet. That's my dad joke. I promise not to get too punny throughout, but I'm very interested in this, and I have to know right off the bat, is it good news or is it bad news?
It's good news.
Oh, okay, good. Whew, that's a relief. And I was afraid, in addition to reducing or eliminating sugar from diet, you were also going to tell us no more chocolate, but that's not the case?
No, it's quite the opposite.
Okay, great. So let's hear where the science is and how this ended up piquing your interest enough to do some additional research.
Well, I like chocolate like the rest of the world. I have chocolate several times a week. It's actually the only source of sugar in my entire diet. I do
Oh,
I do give myself a little slack in the chocolate department because I love it so much, and I believe and have believed for a long time that it's very healthy for you with certain restrictions. And everybody agrees on this. There's medical consensus on this that chocolate is generally a good idea, but over consuming it the way a lot of people do is not a good idea. So you have to eat it in moderation.
are we talking about one square, or are we talking about one bar, or where are we at?
First of all, you have to go for the dark chocolate. What I eat is 86%. I have one square per portion. I try not to go over that one square. And there's no one or universally agreed upon definition of dark chocolate, but a lot of times I'll look at it something and it'll say dark chocolate, and they're talking about things that I wouldn't eat, that I would consider too sweet. You get a lot of chocolate products out there that maybe have 20 or 30% chocolate solids, and the rest of it is sugar and milk byproducts. But I generally go for in the range of 72% to 86%. Over 86, I don't like them. I don't like the texture. I don't like the taste of them. There's a natural bitterness to chocolate, which is why sugar was put into it in the first place. Since I have type 2 diabetes, I watch my sugar intake very carefully. But this is an indulgence that I don't have to give up. It's a few grams of sugar per day. I allow myself about 30, 35 grams of carbohydrate per day, so I can easily absorb the amount in one square. Based on the scientific studies, chocolate is very potent. Even what I would call bad chocolate or mediocre chocolate still can have some profound health effects, and we'll talk about that. You should be comfortable with having just one square of really good chocolate per day. Yeah.
So you said that cocoa powder is 100%, or it ought to be 100% cocoa solids.
Yeah.
So that's not really palatable to just eat by itself. So would that be the ideal format, you think, to buy it in, as like buy a good cocoa powder and then use it as an ingredient and then have more control over your
You can do
sugar
that.
additive?
What I did find, Ben, is that I could add a teaspoon of cocoa powder to my coffee, and it disappears basically. Maybe the coffee tastes a little bit more bitter than it normally would, but it's an easy way to get some cocoa into your system, because just you're not going to just take a spoonful of cocoa powder. You're going to put it in a liquid, right? Now, there is a couple of downsides here. What happened to me with that was it coincided with an increase in irregular heartbeats, which sent me to the doctor. It turned out my heart was completely fine, but I was overdoing it with caffeine. The amount of caffeine in 2 cups of coffee, and then adding in the cocoa powder. And then also I love green tea. I usually like to start my day very early with green tea. All of those have caffeine in them, or versions of caffeine, look-alike molecules. So that was too much. So there was a possible negative side to taking chocolate.
Does all chocolate contain caffeine?
It contains theobromine. The word theobroma is the Latin phrase, the food of the gods. When it was brought from Mesoamerica to Europe in the 16th century, they loved the taste of it so much that they called that in Latin the food of the gods. And the particular form of caffeine that's included in chocolate is called theobromine. It acts on the body in almost identical ways to caffeine. If you wanted to summarize the scientific consensus, and I've read hundreds of scientific journal articles on the topic of chocolate, cocoa, cacao, and health, the consensus would be that it is a healthy food. The main caveat is if you're sensitive to caffeine, you have to be careful with that. I don't think you'd get much of an argument from many food scientists that chocolate is a healthy food. It can be if you don't overdo it.
I liked your idea of including it in a coffee.
Yeah.
I think that seems like it would be very straightforward and manageable for most people if they're already coffee drinkers. If this is a good product, I'm very happy about that.
Chocolate taken in the right amounts and the right products is healthy. The bigger debate is, does it specifically help cancer patients? The data on its beneficial effects on the heart, on circulation, on preventing heart attacks, on fighting Alzheimer's disease is very strong and based upon large, very credible studies, and we'll go over that a bit. I realize we're a channel mainly devoted to cancer, of course, my lifelong pursuit, of finding good remedies for cancer. But cancer patients can die of other things other than cancer directly. And heart disease, for various reasons, could be an after effect of the cancer or of sometimes of a very aggressive treatment. So, you're not defined by one disease. You are an organism with many things going on. So I would say there is evidence of a benefit in cancer patients, but at this point, there's no evidence that taking chocolate by itself will prolong the survival of cancer patients. It will strongly fight against all-cause mortality, meaning dying of any cause. So, it's not a bad trade-off, right, to have something that'll make you live longer. And yeah.
That last time I heard you say that was in a conversation about antioxidants.
Yeah.
And which just makes me wonder, is the active ingredient or ingredients in chocolate, are they antioxidants?
They are, but there's about 5 or 6 different proposed mechanisms by which the flavanols and the flavonoids in chocolate operate. And there are various things going on with the chocolate and the nature of the fats and so forth, not all of which is fully understood. But the flavonoids is a class of colorful chemicals within plants of various kinds. So some of the substances in chocolate are similar to the substances in green tea, for instance, and in some other vegetables. So we can see a pattern, a very strong pattern, that these flavonoids are, if not essential for health, they're very, very contributory towards health. And I'll just make a little historical footnote here, if I may. The flavonoids were discovered by my mentor. Yes.
Albert St. Georgi.
Correct. Just about a year or two after he discovered vitamin C. He named it vitamin P. There's some debate about why he chose that name, but what he agreed to when I did his biography was that the P stood for paprika, Hungarian red peppers. So there was something other than vitamin C in the peppers that was very health promoting. And they could see that in the chemistry laboratory, and they could see it in animal studies and so forth. They had to change the name from vitamin P to flavonoids because the international committee that assigned the vitamin name, there is such a committee, they validate something being a vitamin, said, well, a vitamin is something that prevents or cures a specific disease. And there was no particular one disease that was prevented by these flavonoids, or much less was it essential for human health. And so they took away the name that he had proposed, vitamin P, and instead they're called flavonoids. And flavanols are a subclass of flavonoids. That's the main ingredient in the chocolate. This discovery about the health effects of chocolate is related to the discovery of vitamin C and then of the flavonoids in St. George's laboratory in Hungary.
Mm-hmm. So this was some of his early work.
Yes, from the 1930s. It's part of the work that won him the Nobel Prize in 1936.
Mm-hmm. And when I met him, he was already working in the Martha's Vineyard area, the Woods Hole.
Right, correct.
Yeah, and he was well in his 80s, I think, at that point, and still actively working, and a very interesting man. And it was a real pleasure and an honor to have met him and to know of our association with him. It's something that we're very proud of, and the contribution that vitamin C by itself has made to humanity, I don't think can be calculated. One would think that these other discoveries would also be very, very significant, although you don't hear quite nearly as much about flavonoids as you do vitamin C. Where's the study that you felt was most compelling, and what does it show us?
Well, in terms of cancer, it isn't a very active area of research because the results preventing heart disease were so blowaway that all the money and all the research interest flowed towards that. I did find a study from 2022 from a very good journal called BMC Palliative Care. This is a very top-rated journal, open access journal. So the name of this paper is Effect of Chocolate on Older Patients with Cancer in Palliative Care, a randomized controlled study. They gave some of them 55% chocolate. Some of them were a control group. They didn't get any chocolate. And then there were some who got white chocolate. What they showed was that chocolate with a greater cocoa content has beneficial effects, acting against oxidative stress and systemic inflammation, which are risk factors for the progression of cancer. These are well-known facts. And there are very few, if any, studies have been done on accessible food factors such as chocolate for people who are in palliative care. That's to say, advanced cancer patients. And so they took these three groups and they compared them. And the people in the first group, that's to say, those who got the 55% cocoa chocolate, for 4 weeks did a lot better than the people who just were in the control group and didn't get chocolate at all. The amount that they were given was 5 portions of 5 grams per day. That's just a tiny amount. That's like a chocolate drop or something. It's 25 grams is less than an ounce. So they were, for some weird reason, I mean, they were just trying to see, the minimum level, I would say, of chocolate that would be beneficial. And yet they were able to get enough of the polyphenols to make an effect.
So you mentioned polyphenols. We haven't really established that is a component factor in chocolate. We had mentioned the flavonoids, but can you talk about what the polyphenols are?
It's a group of compounds found in plants and that have beneficial health effects in people, especially in relation to olive oil. Mm-hmm. So here we get some additional polyphenols coming to people who are taking chocolate, but we know that the polyphenols are very strong anti-cancer ingredients. So one would suspect, and correctly, that there's an anti-cancer component to having chocolate as well. Because even within the olive oil, there's like 5 different polyphenols. So here we have other members of that class that are also beneficial. So it's a way of intensifying your polyphenol intake. And the bottom line was there was improved nutritional status and quality of life in the group ingesting chocolate with the higher percentage of cocoa.
Hmm. Hmm. And you had mentioned that this study was looking at, in particular, at the reduction of antioxidative stress. Can
Hmm.
you just elaborate a little bit more for us what that means in lay terms?
The the struggle in cancer patients, as in all people, is to find the right balance between the oxidative, the pro-oxidant chemicals in the body, and the antioxidants. And we have both in our own bodies normally produced. In modern times, people have too much stress, and they create these reactive oxygen species, which are also known as free radicals. And the free radicals can, although they're necessary at times, but they can also do enormous damage to your tissues. So you have to have internal antioxidants, like albumin is an antioxidant within the body, but it also is beneficial to, in general, to take in antioxidants that will soak up these free radicals. And uh,
Hmm.
and so these are sometimes they're found in many different foods. That's why doctors are always telling you to eat lots of fruits and vegetables, because there's a lot of antioxidants in most fruits and vegetables. But here's another way of getting beneficial antioxidants, and that fights against cancer. Cancer is characterized by pro-inflammatory environment with a lot of free radicals dancing around. So the
Hmm.
cancer itself creates the free radicals, and also inflammation, chronic inflammation, which has been called the seedbed of cancer. So this is a way of tamping down that excess inflammation in the body.
Being told one has a diagnosis would cause a lot of stress by itself.
I'm sure it
Never,
does.
never mind anything else. So,
Right.
okay, so you're saying that this study specifically looked at that factor. What was the result?
Oh, they say the conclusions, the present results demonstrate that the consumption of chocolate with a higher cocoa content may contribute to the improved nutritional status and functionality among older cancer patients in palliative care who have greater than 70% prognosis of 30-day survival. So these were still, if you think of people in a hospice situation, but who aren't on their last legs, uh, at least 70% of whom weren't, then it was associated with improved nutrition, and their functioning was better. And even the white chocolate had some benefit, although I've never seen a white chocolate that wasn't heavily sugared. And also, it doesn't have some of the elements that we're looking for in the dark chocolate. But interesting, it's interesting. I've never seen that before. That white chocolate also has some health benefits.
Well, it contains large quantities of cocoa butter, which
Yeah,
brings the smell and the kind of texture and other
right.
aspects of a chocolate with it.
Yes,
But I wonder, when we as a culture eat chocolate, it's almost drug like in its effects. It sort of lights up the pleasure centers in the
right.
brain and so on. Well, I guess the polyphenols and the flavonoids are not the compounds that are doing that. Perhaps it's the caffeine or maybe something else.
The theobromine.
Yes. Are there other compounds that we're considering as potentially having a beneficial effect here other than the ones we've already mentioned?
Well, some of the fats and oils are also potentially beneficial because something is going on with the effect on the heart and the arteries that's highly beneficial. And I suspect that it's very similar to the effects within olive oil. And olive oil, we measure the strength of olive oil by the polyphenol content, but there are other things in olive oil other than just the polyphenols. There are the mono unsaturated fats. And you're right, there is a mood elevating element. You definitely feel something, the food of the gods. I mean, they didn't call coffee the food of the gods or tea the food of the gods. There's a reason. There's just a generally pleasurable sensation. It was central to the Mesoamerican cultures before Columbus It's an intriguing substance. I was really quite surprised by this, and I'm sure the scientists doing the studies were quite surprised. As cancer patients, we also have to be healthy people, and chocolate definitely plays a role in making us healthy people. There is this issue of cadmium and chocolate, which is super important. Cadmium is a heavy metal. It's I don't think there's any bodily need for it, but in any case, it would, if there is, it would be extremely minute amount. I don't think so. I think it's like lead. Cadmium and lead are in similar categories, so you want to avoid them. Some of the chocolate products and cocoa products out there have surprisingly high amounts of cadmium, and some have acceptable low amounts. And I'm returning my Trader Joe's cocoa powder, and I'm buying from Target the Good and Gather cocoa powder, because Good and Gather has very little cadmium in it, and the Trader Joe's has relatively a lot of cadmium.
And I'm assuming you found these results on your favorite site, the consumerlab.com
Correct.
website.
Yes. Yeah.
So
or you
we'll
can
include a link to them in the
yeah.
description as well, because I think people do like to do this type of research when they're trying to add things into their diet.
Yeah.
They want to know that they're good quality and tested appropriately. And it's very hard to know, of course, by just looking at the label and a number.
Tested accurately and tested independently.
Mm-hmm.
Not done by the companies themselves. Ghirardelli is another low cadmium, and I like the taste of it as well. If you can limit yourself just to 1 square per day, you'll get more benefit out of it than you'll get harm from the sugar. And I say that as a person who's kept type 2 diabetes at bay for almost 9 years now.
We've found that essentially putting that square of chocolate on your tongue and just letting it sort of melt slowly and seep into a liquid form, and then sort of swallow the liquid as it's dissolving, is a good way to A, drag out the enjoyment of it, and then B, sort of get a good digestion of it started, of course, and C, then you also get the flavor building over time in your mouth. So if you're really trying to make a dessert, letting it melt in your mouth really slow is probably the best way to get the most pleasure out of it. And I would expect that the pleasure aspect of it is not inconsequential vis-a-vis health.
Totally agree.
So where else is the science pointing at that?
This one is a big study from China, from the journal Aging, 2021. And there's some amazing stuff in here. Chinese go in for very large studies. It's a large country with a huge population, and they love to mobilize their strengths and use the great number of patients available to them for these studies. Now, this was a study, interestingly, of the U.S. population done in China. It wasn't done in the U.S. I don't understand it, but that's the world as it stands today. It was part of another study with 91,891 participants aged 55 to 74. Their chocolate consumption was assessed via food frequency questionnaire, which is typical for how food intake is assessed in science. And what they found is that after an average follow-up of 13.5 years, there were almost 20,000 deaths in that group. But compared with no regular chocolate consumption, the no chocolate eaters, the chance of dying for any cause, I'm translating from the Sciences here, was reduced by 11%. And for certain doses, it was a 16% reduction. There was no particular break point where you had to eat a certain amount in order to get these effects. In fact, eating any chocolate per week seemed to be beneficial, but if you had, let's say, 1 serving a week, you would have about a 13, 14, 15% less chance of dying during the follow-up period.
Wow.
And these are not like huge amounts. Just like, hey, did you eat any chocolate last week? Yeah, check the box. Okay, Well, you just reduced your chance of dying of any cause by about 13, 14, 15%. Not very hard to do, right?
Mm-mm.
The results were much better in people who had never smoked. And the conclusion, chocolate consumption confers reduced risks of death from all causes, from cardiovascular disease and from Alzheimer's
Oh,
disease in this U.S. population. First time we've come across that idea.
interesting.
Yeah. The results on mortality were not due to a reduction in the amount of cancer. It was profound. In this group as a whole, this 100,000 people, the average amount of chocolate taken was only 1.5 servings per week. No significant dose-response association was found for cancer mortality in the entire study population, as well as in never or current former smokers. So, again, from the point of
So
view,
even a tiny amount versus a larger amount, no
didn't make
significant
any
difference.
no significant difference.
Wow.
And then I'll show you another paper here. This is a paper that came out of Yale University School of Medicine. It's by David Katz, who's a well-known health guru in the United States. It's a general review article showing the beneficial effect. Chocolate's been consumed by humans at least since 460, that's 1500, 1600 years, at least, and has over 100 uses as a medical treatment have been documented. There's a group of Indians, native people, called the Kuna, Kuna, who live on islands off the coast of Panama. And they have extraordinary health. And they also consume 10 times as much chocolate or cocoa as do the native Panamanians. Here are three population groups. The island, that's the Kuna Indians who live on their native island. The Kuna Nega, who are Kuna people who live within Panama, and then just people in Panama City. So they have their nationality in common. The rate of high blood pressure among over 60 population in Panama City approaches half the population, 50%. Among the Kuna people living in Panama, it's also quite high. It's about 35%. Now
So
look
it's not
at
genetic, is basically what you're establishing there.
Correct. But then look at what happens with the people living on the island eating 10 times as much chocolate as the native Panama City population is eating. And there, in the over 60 group, it's as close to zero as you could get. There's basically no high blood pressure in that group. And even the younger people too.
I'm not trying to cast any doubt that the chocolate is the factor, the defining factor around this statistic, but we have seen in other conversations and other studies where essentially industrialized diets tend to lend themselves more to ill health than those who are eating a native diet. So might that not be really the more important factor here?
This is a plausible theory. That's all. It's not a proven fact. This is a correlation, as they say, not causation. We don't know exactly why it is, but it's still a striking statistic and one possible explanation. At least part of the answer is probably that this habit of the people who live on that island to eat vastly more cocoa than their equivalent numbers on the mainland. And this is a paper that came from the University of Buenos Aires and University of California, and it also shows from another point of view the effects of cocoa and chocolate on heart disease. And it's another very positive one. And the more flavonoids you have, the less your risk of coronary heart disease, and the large content of flavanols, which are part of the class of flavonoids in cocoa beans, and a decrease in blood pressure, a decrease in overall cardiovascular or heart-related deaths, 77% decrease in the risk when comparing the population that ate more than 3 portions of chocolate per day with the population that consumed less than one, 77% decrease in risk, and so forth. And then I'll just quickly take you to the last paper from Harvard Medical School and the Harvard School of Public Health and the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center. And there we see, again, a reduction of 11% in all-cause mortality and a 15% lower risk of total heart disease. This was a very carefully controlled study and very, very detailed, and the participants were required to forego any other cocoa supplements, but not chocolate intake. And vitamins were also included in the study, but we're not talking about that now. And basically, it was based on a study that originally included 21,000 randomized participants. So this was just part of that larger study. And there was no question that the number of cardiovascular events, meaning like heart attacks and strokes, was significantly less. This part is interesting. If the little black box is to the left of the vertical line, it favored the cocoa extract. Only on one parameter were they the same, and that was for unstable angina. But look at the degree of benefit for all the other indicators of heart disease that you could think of, including all-cause mortality, all-cause deaths, peripheral artery disease. Look at the effect that it had on cardiovascular disease deaths, all the way over to the left side, meaning favored the cocoa extract. Nothing favored the placebo. So you're going to be better off in so many different ways in terms of your likelihood of staying alive if you take, the equivalent of what they gave them, a couple of pills of cocoa powder, essentially. Just having, as I do, 1 square of really good quality chocolate per day on average. And I think you're getting as much benefit out of chocolate as you're likely to get. And it'll be a very good addition to your health.
That's great. We appreciate your bringing these important topics to our attention. For now, for the Moss Report, I'm Ben Moss. How are you healing today? Thank you for watching. We really appreciate all of the support. Please leave a like, a comment, subscribe to the channel, and visit themossreport.com. We wish you all the best for health and healing.